Welcome to The Sex Matters. I'm Dr. Twee.
And I'm Jenna Stewart.
In today's powerful episode, we'll be exploring the deeply impactful topic of childhood sexual abuse, focusing on the often overlooked experiences of male survivors.
We'll hear a brave guest share his story of trauma, healing, and personal growth.
Join us as we discuss the lasting effects of boundary violations and the importance of learning to trust your instincts and setting healthy sexual boundaries in relationships. Today we're going to be talking about boundary violations and how they impact the fear we experience in our lives. I think this particular topic is very profound because it doesn't get talked a lot about. And when you're young, you experience sexuality growing up, primarily through your parents to start, family members, and there's a lot of trust in that experience. And you see it often by the relationships that you encounter, and you start to develop a sense of who you are in this particular realm. And today what we're going to be talking about is a boundary violation, and even more specifically, it's with a man who was abused when he was a child by a family member. So this brings up a really interesting topic because you don't hear very often men coming forward or little boys coming forward to talk about assault or moments when they felt uncomfortable, maybe moments they didn't quite feel ready for something sexually or otherwise. I think in our society that is very much the realm of female and woman, and you hear that quite a lot. But for the men in the room, if there has ever been a time when you felt violated or something was inappropriate or you didn't like the innuendo, you may just chalk that up to like, nah, I'm not going to bring it up because there's a particular way in which it's received. But with this particular patient, I want you to see the significance of how intergenerational trauma really shows up in families, how you see the impact on something that happens with a patient when they're so young, what it does for them as they grow up and as they develop. I think what I'd like to do is, before getting into that too much, I'd love to just bring the patient in. This story has moments where it's quite graphic, and the abuse is when this happened, he was 3, and it happened with a family member. And so that can bring up a lot for all of you just because the family familial trust bond is so sacred. And also the story itself is so painful to imagine. And so just notice if there's anything that's coming up for you as you're experiencing the story, and we'll talk about it. I feel like it's a really important story because many young boys and men experience this, and there isn't always a forum to really discuss it. Would you add anything to that, Jen?
Yeah, I don't think there's a forum for it. And I think that when stuff happens so young, I have a few people in my life where that has happened at such a young age, it's almost like when memories come up for them, they go, that's not true.
Yeah.
You know, it's so suppressed and so compartmentalized and stuffed down into their life that they're so young you wouldn't even, how do you process that when you can't even determine if it's real or it's not? You were so young.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think that there should be a forum for that. If people start to have, some sort of memory or recollection and they're not sure, is a place where they can go and discuss that.
Yeah.
It's a hard topic, especially if you don't know if it's happened or not.
Mm-hmm. Jenna brings up a great point because in this work, you don't have to know the details. If you have a feeling of something, that's enough to work on,
Mm-hmm.
that is enough validation that there's something there. So, because sometimes you may have inadvertently seen something or felt something that wasn't what you imagined as a child was like right, and you didn't know how to make sense of it, And so the only way to really make sense of it is to ignore it as a child, make a story up. There's different ways that children cope with that. Make it okay even. I think with this particular patient, the idea of family, that shows up a lot in culture. If the culture says family is everything or you're safe with family, there is an underlying sense that this is okay. And if there isn't someone there to say, wait, what's happening? They may not even have the language to say that something's wrong. And that's what we want to work with a patient this way, is to trust their instincts, and they become very fear-bound. All right, let's get started. Hi. How are you feeling today?
Centered,
Centered.
little
Little.
dragging, I guess.
I was thinking when you said little, it was like young. That too?
Definitely shown it.
What does little feel like?
Weak, not strong, very vulnerable, not sure of yourself, trying to just survive.
Yeah. I think your story starts when you were little, and those words really fit in terms of, I think, what you've experienced. Your story is so significant because you don't hear a lot of stories about little boys or men having experiences around things that happen to them sexually or otherwise that has brought them discomfort or trauma. You just don't hear about it very often because of the way I think that we hold masculinity. What do you feel about that?
I feel as a man, especially growing up in a Hispanic community, it's very frowned upon to talk about, in my situation, since it was related to family. You know, you never go against your family. You never speak poorly of them. And no matter what happens, you always defend them and you cover for them. And anything that they do isn't bad. And I think if you're raised in that environment where anything that a family member does to you isn't necessarily wrong, you don't view it as a bad event in your life. You view it as, this is just my family caring for me.
And so this feeling of being little, when did you start to feel it today?
Every time I am back with the people I love and care about, I feel I could show my truest self. My truest self is deep down inside. I do feel very little and not quite as strong as the person that I show the rest of the world.
Do you know where you want to start your story?
I think it all goes back to when I was 3. My earliest memory is being called into a family member's room who was a female. And she was in her late teens, probably not even teen at that point. And she wanted me to explore things with her that it was a very different experience than anything I've ever felt with any other family member. She was naked, and I'd never seen a naked woman before. She was very voluptuous and very curvy. And through the eyes of a 3-year-old looking at a very curvy body, it just seemed the proportions were ginormous.
Yeah.
And she started having me do various acts to her. It was a moment when I felt accepted by my family. And I was always the member of the family that stuck out. I didn't look like them.
Physically?
Physically, I didn't look like them. I didn't act like them. I had more of a Caucasian appearance. And to them, I was always sort of the outsider. And so I never felt accepted. And in this moment when she started having me do these sexual things to her, I actually felt accepted. And I felt wanted and needed, and not like I was an outsider anymore. I felt like I was one of them. And that's something that I so desperately wanted because I just felt like they always made fun of me. I was the laughing stock almost. And I was lesser than. And in that moment, I felt like I could be one of them.
You belonged.
I belonged. And it was the first sort of sense of a love that I actually felt from them. I had a purpose. And as long as I was a good boy and was doing the things that I was being asked to do,
Yeah.
I was welcomed and accepted. And that was my very first experience with sex, is by me being good and doing as asked and performing, I would be accepted by someone else. Later on in life, as I got older, and I would go through these periods where I just wanted to feel accepted, wanted to be wanted by someone. And I would naturally just want to go back to those sexual experiences to feel that sense again, to feel that someone actually wanted me, that I had a purpose, that I was good. It's plagued my adult life considerably. And from the age of 3 till probably about 11, the only times that I really felt wanted by the family was when I was doing those things. And it first started with a female, then it led to a male, also inside the family. I didn't know what sex was. I had no idea that it was something that wasn't appropriate. And so to me, it's just like, well, this is what family does to each other. This is okay. And I didn't view it as in a negative light at all. And I didn't even view it negatively until probably my late 30s, when I started to realize that, hey, wait a minute, that isn't right.
What event allowed that to be a perspective shift for you?
When I was in the military and I was injured, I was forced to go through a bunch of psychiatric counseling sessions and also screenings. And they started to ask me if I had any sexual experiences as a child. And I said yes, and then they started talking about, okay, well, this might be what's referred to as molestation. In my mind, it's like, that's not molestation, that's just my family. Everyone goes through that, right? They're like, no, this isn't right. And then that led me to start seeking psychological help later on after that.
I know one of the significant phenomenons that we worked through was the way as an adult that you would be attracted to women. The language we used were like caricatures, because they had exaggerated body parts, and that was very related to, in a way, what happened when you were 3. Because if you imagine a 3-year-old, everything looks big to them. The world is huge. They're little. And so how do you understand that arousal template for you, your attraction to what we've been using, the language around the caricatures?
And again, it goes back to, if you're a 3-year-old and your face is in someone's rear, and it's already a very voluptuous or curvy person, I mean, the proportionality is insane. So as I got older, and then I started to see, okay, why is it that I'm really attracted to these overly augmented individuals? It's like, oh, well, that's sort of making sense. I'm going towards someone who looks that way because I'm trying to find that comfort again. And it's heartbreaking because I've actually had some experiences in my adult life where I've actually been connected and really cared and loved for others. But yet I was still drawn towards that physical attraction. I was still drawn towards that feeling of wanting to get that acceptance. And that feeling that I had when I was a little kid of just being engulfed by these ridiculous proportions. And that's painful to see now.
Yeah. In psychology, that's called trauma repetition, that it's over and over and having those experiences over and over can keep you in that space and keep you in this space of aversion of being a victim or wanting another to accept you in a certain way, or love is through a certain kind of act. Do you find yourself struggling with any of those things now?
Now that I see it as almost as though I was robbed as a child, that someone took away something that could have been natural and beautiful. And my first experiences with sexuality should have been out of a real place of compassion and care. And instead it was just pleasuring someone. And it had nothing to do with actually caring for me. And so now when I see an individual who's very curvy, voluptuous, or the caricature look, it starts to bring up that pain now of, wow, I was attracted to that, but I was attracted to that because of what happened to me. Something that happened to me that should have never happened to me. And so now when I see that appearance, it's more painful to me, and it doesn't fulfill the same feeling that it once did in my life.
And so with that shift, have you noticed that something else is arising that you're seeing that you're attracted to, or has it not quite gotten to that place yet?
No, it has. I mean, recently I became very attracted to a woman by looking into her eyes. When in the past, all I'd be looking at is their body. And I actually developed an emotional bond with someone
Yeah.
where I felt cared for and seen. And just by looking in her eyes, I could feel it.
Yeah.
And it was a feeling of comfort that I've never felt physically or sexually.
I think it kept you up for days.
Weeks. Yeah, it was
It's powerful.
so powerful.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful for that, because maybe that's what I should have been focused on all along. And the first 30 some odd years of my life, I was just focused on all of the wrong things. And instead of feeling that bond with someone, though, what it should feel to be with someone physically, I was just completely focused on something that was rooted in trauma and rooted in pain.
And you'd mentioned one of the hardest moments for you as an adult was knowing that your family knew about a CPS report. Is that something that you want to share?
It wasn't until I started really doing this work and really looking at the incidences of my childhood that I started to ask questions. And I don't speak to many family members at all. I speak to my parents, and that's about it. But this past holiday, a distant relative had reached out that was on the side of the people that committed the abuse. And they wanted to ask me why it is that I've just completely shunned the family all these years. And I said, well, as I've gotten older, I've started to realize that there's a lot of things that happened in my childhood that shouldn't have happened. And I feel that there's a lot of problems in the family, and I just want to stay out of it. Every time I'm around them, I don't want that trauma to keep persisting in my life. I don't want to be reminded of that pain. And she then told me that there was actually a CPS investigation that had happened at the household. And it was actually before my family started leaving me there to be babysat for all those years. And it's so painful to think that my own parents could have the knowledge that stuff like that was happening in that household, but then still take me there every single day and leave me there. And there was a moment when I was 5, one of the family members took me to a party where I watched a girl get gang raped. And I remember just screaming and crying. And I actually, as a 5-year-old, I ran up to the guy that was doing this to this girl. And I remember trying to hit him. And I was just a little 5-year-old, and this guy was late teens, maybe even older. And he just threw me against the wall. like it was nothing. In that moment, I felt so weak, and I felt like I couldn't save this poor girl. And I remember looking up at the family member that had taken me there, and I was just like, make them stop. And I remember her just laughing at me because she thought it was funny that I was trying to punch this guy. And that day I went home and I told my mom, I was like, hey, something happened. This isn't right. You know, this woman was screaming, I was crying, and the person that was there watching me, who took me there, they just laughed at me. And that was it. And I remember my mom looking at me and being like, well, you're okay. So you need to just keep going, and you have to go back tomorrow because we're 4 and we don't have nowhere else to take you. And we have to work. So you just need to keep going.
What would you have wanted her to say?
I wanted her to say that the safety of my child comes first. And get in the car, we're out of here. No matter what it takes, I'm going to make sure you're protected.
Yeah. That's why safety is so important to you now.
It's so important to me. It's overtaken my life.
Yeah.
But knowing that my parents knew about not only CPS investigation, but then that incident, but they continued to take me to that home for years after, with the excuse that we were 4, that we had no other choice. I find it disgusting.
Yeah.
And the way I view my parents now is in a place of love. And that's been very hard for me.
The loss.
Such a loss.
Especially because family is so important in your culture. It's everything.
And since I don't maintain any communication with all of my family, it's my parents that I've really relied on for all these years. And now I don't even feel like I have them.
Yeah. You feel alone a lot.
I feel so alone. And so ever since I found out about the investigation, it's just, I feel so alone in this world.
Yeah. I know that part of you being here is that there's such this beautiful part of you that wants to help people, and you find a lot of meaning in that, to be of service. What is the message that you would want to share with others?
I always felt, especially being sexually assaulted by a man, that automatically I was gay. And I held a stigma with that for so many years. And the trauma as a child and that stigma, it actually gave me a superpower. And it's so difficult to explain, but when you're a child, especially being sodomized by someone who's grown, you learn how to disassociate yourself from pain. You learn how to block everything out. And especially when it was so repetitive for so many years, you just become a wall. And with a flip of a switch, you don't feel anything. But that superpower, and especially that stigma, that anger, where I always thought, I'm gay, I used that power to help myself. And it was out of a place of spite, but I was like, I'm going to show all these people I'm going to be more successful than they ever were. I'm going to drown them all in my accomplishments, and I'm going to make them regret what they did to me.
It's like revenge.
Revenge. But not being able to feel pain, that's, if you can harness that power, it's not pleasant. But if you could use it to your advantage and put it towards something that can really benefit you and me, I put it towards working ridiculous hours and really just having such a fight that I would never quit, that I was able to accomplish something pretty amazing and become pretty successful. And I was able to block out everything else in my life because I didn't need anything. Because when you live as a wall without any feeling, you no longer need anything. And you can really dedicate yourself to something, whatever it is you put your mind to.
It's really interesting though, because your wall has been coming down now pretty consistently because you've been in this work and you've been feeling a different kind of power around your feelings and healing and what you need. How has that been for you?
It's been sad, actually. It's been really sad because that superpower that I relied on that made me very successful, I'm now seeing that it's caused me to not enjoy life and not to live a full life. And I exist, but I'm not surrounded by love.
You're protected.
Protected, but I'm not really protected because all I'm doing is hurting myself. And when you learn to live a life of just such seclusion, when those barriers are finally dropped and you're finally able to experience what it feels like to be surrounded by love and people that you truly care about, like I don't want to live that life anymore.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Love you.
I want to do just a very brief debrief. The deeper way that I would like for us to word is, as we're talking about boundary violations, what I'd like to do in the sex lab is offer up the art of saying no. Because in these experiences where you have boundary violations, one of the most difficult things is to decipher for yourself, does that feel good? Is that something that you like? And if you don't like it, do you know? And what's the cognitive interference if you don't like it? And what do you say? Or are you worried about hurting the other person? Are you worried that if you say you don't like something, that they'll leave? What's the tensile strength of your actual relationships? And how do you test them in deeper ways so that you can build more trust? Because we're not supposed to have relationships where there isn't conflict, but the quality of the relationship is how well do you manage those conflicts? And how honest are you when you talk about them? And how vulnerable are you? When we have this moment in the sex lab, I really want you to feel into your body. So one thing that Jenna's really good at is her attunement to you, the energy, and your actual bodies, and just notice what happens for you when you want to say no. I'm going to set up a situation so that you will be working through how to say no in different ways. Even if there's a part of you that wants to say yes, figure out a way to say no. You may not exactly know what I mean by that, but you will once we're in the sex lab. Okay, so I'm going to set you up into the sex lab. So I'm going to need a blindfold, and then we'll start there. You have that blindfold for me?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead and come around him and put it over his eyes.
I'm going to put this over your eyes. You just hold it where it's comfortable for you. Okay.
You can go ahead and tie it, but tie it tight, a little too tight. Perfect. Grab the ends and put both ends in one hand and check in with him about how he's feeling.
How are you feeling?
A little constricted, nervous, trying to feel into my body. At this point, I kind of want to fight it.
Part of what I want is for you to make this a little uncomfortable with the pressure, with that, pulling it kind of back, that, you know, it's like holding it with a kind of a brace and bringing
How are you
it towards
feeling?
you.
This feels really tight, and it's making me feel uncomfortable. So if
Perfect.
you would loosen it up just slightly,
No.
right there is good.
Do it again, same pressure, and then see if he asks you not to do. See if he asks you to loosen it again.
This really doesn't feel good. So I think I need you to stop because this is too tight.
Perfect. And then loosen it slowly, and then come sit with him. And then ask him the moment that he knew he was going to tell you he didn't like it and he was going to tell you no.
When did you know that was too tight and you wanted to tell me no?
Second time when you started tightening it again, it was too much. And I was trying to work with the exercise, but it just didn't feel good. I needed it to stop.
Did you have a moment when you didn't want to say no?
Initially, when you put it on, I said, okay, I'm going to go with it. When you first started tightening, I wanted you to stop. And I didn't voice it right away. I kind of went with it.
You kind of had an argument in your head of,
Yes.
am I going to say, when am I going to say
Yes.
no?
Yes. It was the second time my ears were squeezed up against my head. I said, this is not
Uncomfortable.
This is not right. So, yeah.
Perfect, Joey. Let's bring him back once that's a wrap. What did you notice?
He gave her an opportunity to do it again after saying it was uncomfortable the first time.
Uh-huh.
He acquiesced pretty easily.
Uh-huh.
He wasn't going to protest until he was given permission to protest.
Yeah. That's really important. What
Yeah.
else? What else did you notice?
He used some less definite language. I think I would like you to stop versus please stop.
It was a little bit more tentative. Wait, where's the line, right? Is it here? Is it here? But it doesn't feel good immediately. It's not an unequivocal thing. It's very, the minute something doesn't feel right. The work is to let you really play with those nuances. Anything else, Jamie, for you you notice like the language, and this often happens like with children, they just say it like, I don't think I want to do that. No, come here. Come to blah, blah, blah. They just say it very gently, and then you started to really get more comfortable. Now, had she been more persistent, it would have either been more of a conflict or more uncomfortable, or you would have had to be more assertive, which would have been uncomfortable for you. Yes. I'm not letting you leave. You will sit here, right? Something like that. Mm-hmm. And the minute that you were uncomfortable, she loosened it, and then she tightened it.
Yeah.
Right. And what happened for you in that moment?
It was too much. And what I was trying not to do was to shout it, because it felt like I feel at times I go from very quiet to extreme.
Right.
And it's been conditioned in me
Right.
to assume that's what I was doing.
That's right.
And I mean, even putting the blindfold on, the material's kind of coarse.
Yes.
And it from the start, it didn't particularly feel great.
Right.
And then to go from this gentle tug to feeling like my head's going to pop off.
Yeah.
And I know that's extreme language, but
No, it's
it
great.
was very tight.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you had been closer to me or in a different position, I might have hit you, because it was really, it was starting to feel uncontrollable at that point.
Good.
I've given you a warning. I think I don't like this.
So let's talk about like a growl. Okay, you know how dogs, when they don't like you, they've got something and they want you. We need to develop your growl. Okay, and but the thing that I want to make sure is you knew you didn't like it from the beginning. The material itself was saying, ugh, right? You already had an instinctual moment that something was off, and we didn't start there.
Yes.
You developing a growl and starting this language that doesn't go from 0 to 60, but just getting more serious, because I'm not sure if you experienced when he was saying no, if no sounded like no.
I think that there's a lot of, I'm just going to go along with this because I don't want to piss anyone off. I don't want to push back. I don't want to cause a stink, so you're in that mindset of like, okay, I'm just going to stick to this. And then the first time you're like, do I really have to sit through this? And so then, okay, we'll let it go a little bit. And then it got tighter and you're like, okay, no, I don't like this. But it's that first instinct that you want to go off of. If it's like, I don't like this fabric, can we get a different fabric at least? Like asking for what you want so that the experience then becomes more pleasurable, more desirable, more, connected to whoever that person is. Instead of being a yes person, we all fall into that. You say yes to everything and then you go, oh, why did I say yes? I don't want to do that. I hate, this situation, these circumstances, is learning right off the bat. No, this doesn't feel good. And I'm going to say something about it.
Okay.
As you're learning not to apply rules, right, to your life, that now we have a rule about when something is inappropriate, give it a minute, right? It's not just when a fabric hits your body now, you're gonna be like, no, right? It's not, let's not overcompensate when we're learning a skill. Let's see where we are and we'll work through it, because in the time constraints that we have here, we only can do little snippets, but in real time, we have time to have conversation around it that is more full.
That brings us to the end of this intense and important episode of The Sex Matters. We want to thank our courageous guest for sharing his story and insights.
Remember, your traumas do not define you, and it's never too late to start healing.
If you've been affected by any of the issues discussed today, please reach out for professional support.
We'll see you next time on The Sex Matters. This is Dr. Twee,
And I'm Jenna Stewart.
signing off.
The work with Twee is actually really instructive. It's the lab part which I have a harder time with because it's so intense, and whatever I'm carrying in my head, it makes it very difficult. The relationship I built up with Dr. Twee over time makes it easier to say, oh, I understand what I'm doing here. So that part's fine, and trying to get in touch with my own anger in a healthy way and feel entitled to it is a little bit more difficult for me. Working with Jenna is interesting because personally I'm kind of a shy person, and this is way outside my comfort zone. And I wanted to do this work so that I could move through that. I use that to avoid real intimacy. And Jenna's very kind, and she reads energy well, and she's not making me feel uncomfortable. It's my own discomfort in the situation. Having this all on film is difficult. And I realized that I embarrass myself instead of trying to kind of work through, hey, this is the next part of my growth, is to try to be able to move through this.